In the immense and arid Old West, where the sun beats down on the land and loneliness lurks on every horizon, an unexpected story unfolds, the tale of a rich and nearly dying cowboy whose life was about to end until he was found by a poor widow and her children. They were invisible to the world, fighting against poverty and obscurity, but they held a powerful secret, the strength of the human heart. What seemed like a chance encounter would soon reveal a connection that would change their lives forever. Prepare for a journey full of courage, sacrifice, and transformation, where the true meaning of wealth is discovered in the most unlikely of places. The plains of the West stretched for hundreds of miles, golden and arid, beneath a vast blue sky that seemed to have no end. The wind blew hot and dry, carrying the scent of parched earth and dead grass, an unforgiving backdrop for any soul who dared to brave that solitude. In the midst of this harsh landscape, Jedediah Cole was an imposing figure, even in his weakness. A cowboy known not only for his fortune, but for the mystery he carried in his tired eyes. Jedediah had earned his wealth with sweat, risk, and a determination that was almost relentless. His ranches, scattered across those inhospitable lands, held vast herds and a silent empire that few knew in detail. Yet his wealth brought no comfort to his battered body and weary soul. Old wounds from falls and fights, combined with nights spent in solitude and a fragile constitution, had left the man on the brink between life and death. Jedediah's life was a lonely one. He had almost no friends. His business dealings were many, but handled at a distance, and with coldness. And his family was a distant memory he tried to avoid thinking about. His routine was filled with horses, money, and nights of vigilance, while his heart seemed to yearn for something he couldn't name. Not far from there, in a modest cabin made of old wood with a roof that creaked in the wind, lived Martha. She was a woman of silent strength, marked by the losses life had imposed on her. A young widow with 3 small children to raise, Martha's eyes held a mix of weariness and hope that kept her standing. Each day was a battle against poverty, the stubborn land that yielded little, and the debts that threatened to swallow everything. Martha's children, Samuel, Lily, and Ben, were the reason for her resilience. Samuel, the eldest, had the curiosity and audacity of childhood, while Lily carried a sparkle in her eyes that reminded her mother of her own youth. Ben, the youngest, didn't yet fully understand the harshness of life, but felt the love that united them and the protection his mother offered. The meeting between Jedediah and Martha was as unexpected as it was inevitable. During one of his rounds, weak and nearly without strength, Jedediah fell, unable to continue. It was Martha who found him while she was foraging for herbs for her children, her maternal instinct speaking louder than her fear. Even in the face of the unknown and the man's apparent wealth, she didn't hesitate. Taking him to her cabin was an act of compassion that sealed an intertwined destiny. The wealthy cowboy, accustomed to power and autonomy, found himself vulnerable in that simple, humble space. The children's presence, the widow's serenity, and the smell of the wet earth after a light rain began to deconstruct the walls he had built for decades. Little did he know that this small family, so far from his life of luxury and loneliness, would rekindle a forgotten flame in his heart and transform not only his end, but the beginning of something much greater. The days that followed Jedediah's fall were marked by a difficult coexistence filled with uncertainty. The wealthy cowboy, used to commanding his vast empire alone, now depended entirely on the care of a simple woman and her children. His initial resistance wasn't just about pride, but also fear of feeling vulnerable, something he had never learned to face. Martha, in turn, regarded this stranger with a mixture of curiosity and compassion, aware that the man carried more than physical wounds. He bore a broken soul that needed healing. The cabin was small and modest, filled with the strong scent of aged wood, tanned leather, and the smoke of the fire burning in the wood stove. The cramped rooms barely fit the family, but Martha didn't hesitate to make space for Jedediah, even knowing it could be dangerous for them all. The children, initially cautious, soon began to warm up to the man who could barely sit without wincing in pain. Samuel, ever curious, asked shy questions, while Lily tried to lift his spirits with stories and laughter that seemed to break through the heavy silence. Ben, still innocent, saw Jedediah as a near mythical figure, someone who sparked his imagination even in weakness. The cabin's routine changed. Those simple walls, once marked only by the daily struggle against hunger and exhaustion, became the stage for small moments of hope. Jedediah, who once viewed the world only through the lens of wealth and power, began to see the value in simple gestures: a shared meal, a blanket for a cold night, a comforting word in the silence of pain. But the West did not forgive weakness, and threats began to loom like shadows stretching across the sunset. Ambitious men, hungry for control over Jedediah's lands, started circling the area with clear intentions. The news that the cowboy was vulnerable spread quickly among fortune hunters and rivals, and the danger became imminent. For Martha, already used to fighting against the world, it meant yet another battle, not just for Jedediah's physical survival, but for the protection of her children and the fragile peace beginning to blossom. Within that tense atmosphere, relationships deepened. Jedediah, who had always avoided showing emotion, began to slowly open up to Martha. Conversations that were once nothing more than orders and brief replies gave way to stories, doubts, and even quiet laughter. He spoke of his difficult childhood, the losses he had endured, and the burden of loneliness that had accompanied him for years. Martha, in turn, shared her fears and dreams, her sleepless nights worrying about her children's future. The children, not fully grasping the nuances of the adult world, simply loved the presence of that strong man as if he were an anchor in their turbulent lives. But not all moments were peaceful. The nights came laden with physical pain for Jedediah, and the shadow of death always seemed to linger near. Martha, while tending to him with tenderness, also felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier, and sometimes alone in the quiet of the night. She wondered whether he would survive, or if she and her children would be left alone once more. In the silence of the cabin, thoughts and fears collided, creating a tense atmosphere charged with hope and anxiety. Time, however, proved that the unexpected can be a powerful force. Jedediah's vulnerability, which could have been his ultimate downfall, became the very bond that united this unlikely family. He with his past of wealth and solitude, she with her poverty and courage, and the children, with their innocence and dreams. Together they formed a small world where hope was reborn, even in the unforgiving heart of the Wild West. The fragile routine that Jedediah and Martha's family had built began to shift when an unexpected event shook the delicate balance of their small world. Lily, the middle child, who had until then been the vibrant light of the cabin, fell suddenly and gravely ill. A high, unrelenting fever took hold of her, leaving her weak and silent as fear and anguish spread through the household like a growing shadow. Martha's heart ached at the sight of her daughter's suffering. Their already meager savings barely covered basic needs, and the idea of seeking medical help seemed distant and terrifying. The nearest clinic was days away, and the cost of treatment was far beyond what a family like hers could afford. It felt as if fate were testing the very limits of her strength. Samuel, wide-eyed with worry, tried to understand the meaning of the illness, while Ben, too young to grasp the severity of the situation, held his sister's hand in silence, seeking comfort. Jedediah watched the scene with a mix of helplessness and a growing urge to act. A man who had always relied on his wealth to solve problems now found himself in a situation where money seemed as distant as hope itself. Yet something inside him stirred, an urgent desire to protect the family that had so generously welcomed him, without knowing who he truly was or the fortune he possessed. Determined to act, Jedediah summoned the last of his strength to travel to the nearest town. The journey was grueling, His weakened body nearly gave out along the way, but urgency kept him moving. Upon arrival, he sought medical help for Lily, negotiating with doctors while carefully concealing his true identity, not wanting his pride to be wounded or his intervention to be seen as something grand or self-important. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Martha and the children waited trapped between hope and fear. The bond between them and Jedediah had already deepened. He was no longer a stranger, but part of the family fighting to survive. Lilia's illness exposed the vulnerability of them all, but also reinforced the invisible thread that tied their fates together. When Jedediah returned with medicine and promises of treatment, a new chapter began. The small family faced a battle for the girl's life, a challenge far greater than any material hardship. The cowboy's quiet, generous act of using his wealth to save a life without fanfare marked a profound transformation, not just for Martha and her children, but for Jedediah himself. But the forces circling Jedediah's land were not willing to wait. News of his absence and weakness had spread among greedy men who began crafting plans to seize what they saw as easy territory. The temporary peace the cabin offered was now under threat, and the wealthy cowboy and the poor widow would soon have to face not only illness, but also the greed and violence that haunted the Wild West. Fate, as always, seemed to toy with the lives of those bold enough to dream. Amid this storm of trials, a flame of hope continued to burn, a hope born of sacrifice, courage, and the unwavering belief that even in the darkest moments, life can surprise and transform. The weeks that followed Lily's illness were the most difficult that little family had ever faced. Though the girl had begun to show signs of improvement thanks to the treatment Jedediah had brought, she remained fragile, and the shadow of uncertainty hung heavily over the wooden cabin. Every breath she took echoed as a reminder of everyone's vulnerability, and Martha felt the weight on her shoulders that was protecting her daughter's health, keeping her other children safe, and dealing with the growing threat encroaching upon their land. The greedy men, aware that Jedediah was physically weakened and emotionally distracted, began to escalate their actions. At night, shadows moved near the property's silent riders, watching, provoking. The tension was palpable, and the cabin, once a place of refuge, now felt like a prison under constant surveillance. Martha could no longer deny the need to act. She knew survival depended not only on her daughter's recovery, but on protecting the entire family. In this tense environment, Jedediah felt his body weakening, but his mind growing stronger. He began to understand that the life he'd led until now marked by loneliness and a relentless pursuit of wealth had not prepared him for the battle he now faced. This was not a battle for land or power, but one for love, for family, and for dignity. The presence of Martha and the children had awakened something in him, a deeper sense of purpose, a motivation that transcended mere survival. Conversations between Jedediah and Martha became more frequent, filled with hope, fear, and plans. He, who once hid behind pride and distance, now shared his weaknesses and desires. Martha, who had never imagined she could fully trust anyone again, felt a bond growing as strength that connected their vastly different lives. Together, they began to devise strategies not only to face their enemies, but to build a future that felt possible. Samuel, though still young, showed himself attentive and involved, learning from the cowboy who, despite his frailty, never gave up the fight. Lily, still weak, looked at Jedediah with renewed light in her eyes, as if she saw in him a silent guardian. Then, innocent and affectionate, brought joy that lit up the quiet, fearful moments. Yet the tension wasn't limited to outside threats. Inside the cabin, each person's fears and doubts threatened to shatter their fragile balance. Martha endured sleepless nights, torn between caring for Lily and the fear of losing everything. Jedediah battled constant pain and the fear of not being able to protect those who had already saved his soul. The West was unforgiving, and the line between life and death grew thinner with each passing day. Amid this internal and external struggle, a crucial decision had to be made. The cabin could no longer remain a defenseless sanctuary. Jedediah and Martha realized that survival would require not only courage, but painful sacrifices. Fate was forcing them to confront their own limits and discover the true meaning of the word family, not just as a bond of blood, but as a choice, a union forged in the face of chaos. And so, as the storm of threats loomed on the horizon, that unlikely family prepared for the confrontation that would determine not only the future of the land, but the fate of their very lives. The suspense grew, and the certainty that nothing would ever be the same again consumed every thought, every gesture, every beat of the hearts that refused to give up. Night fell over the plains like a thick veil, darkening every corner of the horizon, with a silence so dense that even the rustling of the leaves felt heavy with foreboding. The sky, once clear, was now cloaked in dark, coal-colored clouds. The air was thick, electric. Martha sensed it before she saw or heard anything. This night would not be like the others. Something was about to happen. Inside the cabin, Jedediah sat at the worn wooden table, watching the shadows stretch across the cracks in the window. His gaunt, pale face now carried a firm expression, the look of a man who knew his time had run out. Since deciding to protect this family, he had known the confrontation was inevitable. The men who had been circling the property for weeks were ready to strike. And he, even in sickness, would not allow them to take what he now valued more than any ranch. Those 3 children and the woman who had given him a reason to live again. Martha moved quickly to organize the children, forcing a calmness into her voice. She hid Lily, still weak, beneath the bed with Ben, covering them in blankets and whispering that they must stay quiet, no matter what they heard. Samuel insisted on helping, refusing to hide. Though young, his eyes had seen more than many grown men's, and his courage was a reflection of the man Jedediah was becoming. Outside, horses approached with muffled, deliberate steps. 5 men, brutal, armed, and determined to take by force what they had failed to seize through intimidation. Their leader, Harlan Pike, an old rival of Jedediah's, didn't just want the land. He wanted to humiliate the sick cowboy, to erase his legacy. This place ain't worth nothing without a strong man in charge, he shouted, his voice cracking through the night like thunder. But Jedediah wouldn't give in. Breathing heavily, supported by his old rifle, he stepped through the front door, hands steady. Lightning lit the night, revealing his weakened but upright figure. Behind him, Martha appeared with a weapon in hand, her hands trembling, but her eyes unwavering. They weren't just defending a house. They were defending their right to exist. The first shot didn't come from Jedediah, but from one of the intruders, hitting the cabin wall with a sharp thud. The reply was swift. Martha, with more accuracy than she believed possible, shot the hat off one of the men, forcing them to scatter. Jedediah, body aching, kept his aim steady. He didn't need to hit them all, just to show that as long as he stood, no one would take anything from this place. The gunfight was brief but brutal. Shots echoed through the hills, mingling with the crack of lightning above. Samuel, hidden near the door, handed them ammunition as Martha and Jedediah took turns holding the line. When one of the men tried to flank the cabin, he was caught in a makeshift trap that Jedediah had taught Samuel to build. The attacker fell with a scream, and the others hesitated. This was no longer an easy conquest. It had become a living trap fueled by courage and desperation. Harlan, realizing he wouldn't win that night, pulled back. "This ain't over, Cole," he shouted before vanishing into the darkness with his gang. But to Jedediah, this was a victory, not because of the enemy's retreat, but because of the resistance itself. A living proof that, even with a body ravaged by illness, his soul remained unbroken. As silence returned, and the first drops of rain fell onto the dry earth, Martha dropped to her knees, hands stained with gunpowder, eyes brimming with tears. Jedediah approached slowly, leaning on Samuel's shoulder, and together, without a word, they understood something had changed forever. The night had taken something from them, their peace, their illusion of safety, but it had also revealed something greater, that together they were stronger than they ever imagined. Inside, Lily still slept, unaware of what had just unfolded. But her face was no longer pale. Warmth had returned to her skin. And there, in the heart of a threatened cabin, beat something stronger than fear or pain, the rebirth of a family. And though danger still loomed, a new certainty rose with the sound of the rain. They now had something that neither death nor greed could ever take away. The rain that fell that early morning washed away more than just the dust from the plains. It washed away fear, tension, and the weight of a past that no longer had a place in that cabin. When the sun finally broke through the gray clouds and painted the sky with golden and orange hues, its light revealed a transformed family. The small wooden house, marked by gunfire and silence, had become a symbol of resilience and rebirth. Jedediah woke early, before even the children, and sat on the porch with a blanket over his shoulders. The morning air was damp and clean, and for the first time in many years, he took a deep breath. No rush, no pain, just presence. His body was still weak, his bones ached, and the illness still cast shadows over his days. But something inside him had grown stronger, something that would not bend to time or death. Purpose. Martha appeared shortly after, her hair tied back, her eyes tired but steady. She sat beside him without a word. They no longer needed many words. Between them now existed trust, respect, and a kind of love that isn't built on promises, but on sacrifice and truth. Inside, the children were slowly waking. Lily, now recovering with surprising speed, laughed with Ben and Samuel as they ate the porridge their mother had prepared. The fear was gone from her eyes. The illness, though recent, felt like a distant memory, as if hope had healed more than any medicine could. That very day, Jedediah made a decision that would change everything for himself, for Martha, and for her children. He called Samuel and walked with the boy to the top of the hill, where one could see the full stretch of the land. "You see all this?" he said, pointing with a trembling hand. "This land was once my only wealth. Now, it will be the beginning of your life." And there, in front of the wide-eyed boy, Jedediah revealed his plan. He would transfer ownership of the land to Martha and her children, with all documents properly signed and legalized. He knew he wouldn't live much longer. His days were numbered. But he would not let his life end as the tale of a lonely man with too much gold and no soul. He wanted his final legacy to be life itself. Martha resisted. "I can't accept this, Jed. You worked for all of it." But Jedediah answered with the calm of someone who had made peace with his fate. "And now I want it to work for you. This isn't charity. It's justice. It's what I've learned from all of you." In the following days, lawyers came to the cabin. Documents were signed. Titles were registered. Word spread, and the men who had once threatened them returned. But this time, they found not a fragile man, but a strong woman with legal ownership, brave children, and the living memory of a cowboy who had changed everything. They backed off. They knew that land was no longer alone. Jedediah lived for a few more months, long enough to see the first harvests, the animals tended by Samuel, and Martha planting flowers in front of the cabin, long enough to hear Ben call him Grandpa for the first time, and long enough to understand that even as death approached, he had finally learned how to live. When he passed, on a quiet spring morning, the family buried him beneath the tree at the top of the hill, with a simple handmade cross. There were no grand speeches, just a moment of silence as the wind moved across the plains, as if the land itself were giving thanks. Years later, the story of Jedediah Cole would become a local legend, not for his cattle or his gold or even his land, but because he left behind one final, Extraordinary mark on the world. The living proof that even the hardest heart can bloom with a single act of compassion. That kindness, even when it comes late, can change everything. And that sometimes, saving a life is the same as being saved by it.